So Philip joined Google last month and is working with Peter Norvig on building tools to improve the teaching of programming and computer science. He's received degrees from MIT and his Ph.D. from Stanford just recently. So I'll turn it over to Philip.
Great. Thanks, Jacqueline. Everyone can hear me from the back, right? There's no clapping involved here. Okay. Anyway, so I'm going to basically this hour, my goal is just to be maximally useful to like everybody in this room. So if it ends up with me talking for most of the hour, that's great. If it's you all talking or asking questions, that's also great because whatever I can do to be most useful to people here, that's like basically my goal for the hour. So the only notes I really have is this like bootloader sheet here. I'm just gonna like rattle off some meta stuff and then I'm just gonna start going. So basically the format is I just have this one piece of HTML here, and these are the 20 kind of lessons I summarize in the epilogue of my PhD book, and this is going to be completely nonlinear. So, whatever people are, whatever the conversation diverges towards, just for the sake of the recording, in the back there, I'll just, I'll just highlight that here. So this could be, any one of these 2 to 20 combos we can just talk about. Right? So whatever direction this ends up going in, this is going to be really exciting because I have no idea what's going to happen. So just to start with logistics, this is not a typical tech talk. I was kind of surprised that they're on the tech talk calendar or something because I actually gave a TikTok here last year about my research, and it was a very standard schema, right? It's like, here's my research, here's the slides, and then I give a talk, and then you say that people can interrupt with questions and stuff, but people usually don't interrupt with questions, and you give a talk for half an hour, 45 minutes, and then some people ask you questions later, and then you respond with some canned answers. So I'm sure all of you, mostly interns, students, have heard plenty of people speak in this sort of schema, right? It's like, I'm going to show off what I did and then maybe ask some questions. And then, they're like, did you consider doing this? And they're like, no, we didn't. So this will not be like this. I am highly interruptible. So like, if there should be mics going around or something, but like, seriously, totally interrupting anytime. You're interrupting right now? There should be other mics everywhere else. Anyways, so, I am here as a peer and not as any kind of authority figure or anything. So I was in this audience exactly last summer. I was an intern here. It was almost the final year of my PhD, and I was an intern here in Mountain View. And Jacqueline and others organized a bunch of these great talks from Google leaders, right? So there were vice presidents, research directors, everyone talking to the interns about how great Google is and about leadership and about career building and everything. And I thought those were really interesting talks, but I always felt that I would like to hear more from people who are in my same position. So when I first got here, one of the things I really want to do, since it was in the summer and there's a bunch of interns there, and I had just been in the audience 1 year earlier, I wanted to give a certain kind of talk like that. So this is kind of the talk that I would have maybe wanted to hear when I was an intern here. So I'm going to do a cheesy quick show of hands thing. This is the only interactive thing I promise. So how many people here are full-time? Oh, we got quite a few people full-time. Okay, cool. And how many are interns, I guess? Okay, good. Awesome, good. And out of the interns, how many are currently undergrads or master students, I guess? Undergrads, master students? Okay, good. And then how many are doing their PhD right now? Oh, wow, we got quite a lot. Okay, good. Perfect. And these will get slightly more embarrassing. So who has just finished their first year? Okay, you see where this is leading. All right. First year of PhD, sorry. First year of PhD just finished. Okay, good. And then second year, just finished 2 years. Okay, and then just finished 3. Okay, faces are looking more and more grizzled here. Just finished 4. Just finished 5. Okay, I'm not going to ask about the rest. Okay, cool. So I just wanted to calibrate this up because everyone probably gets different stuff out of it depending on what level you're at. Oh, actually, out of the people here who are not currently doing a PhD, how many of you might be considering doing one in the future? Oh, wow, that's quite a lot. Okay, great. Awesome. Cool, so I'm going to just give a bit of background about my PhD memoir project, and we'll just take it from there. So just a little background on myself. I did my PhD in computer science. I took about 6 years to finish, and I did not know I did not have the green light to graduate until about 3 months before I graduated. So, I was working all the way up to the end, and once I got the green light, everything was good. I just, schedule defense and then write a dissertation and get everything checked out. But up until end of January 2012, I did not know that I was going to graduate, and my fate was still uncertain. And I'm very lucky that everything worked out really well in the last 6 months. So towards the end of my PhD, right when I was around hopefully getting the green light, I thought that that my dissertation, maybe at most 5 people would read it, right? Because it's basically my thesis committee and maybe 1 or 2 other suckers who I sucker in reading it. The papers I wrote, maybe like 50 might read a total, right? That's like a reasonable number. But I wanted to have something that would be lasting beyond my PhD, beyond just the particular research I did. So I thought about the fact that I looked at, throughout my PhD, I'd done a lot of writings on my website about, the experience of going to grad school, and I've been reading a lot about it. And one thing that did not exist was a comprehensive account of one person's PhD experience. There have been, say, professors have been writing about, there's I'm sure you all know that there's a few professors who've written about PhD advice and stuff, top 10 tips of getting into grad school, or advice for getting your dissertation set or whatever. And there's a small set of that. So on one end, there were people in authority who were writing back wistfully about their experience and oh, you guys should work hard and do well and stuff like I did. And on the other end, there were the super whiners, right? So there's the PhD comics types of grad students who might have dropped out and they're like, oh, my life sucks, and then I'm gonna rant about it. So if you look up PhD life or whatever on Google, you get these 2 polar opposites. You get people who are offering stately advice. You get professors, research leaders, and perhaps some of the people you've been hearing talk here and at other places of why doing a PhD is good and so forth. And on the very other extreme, you have people who are is this working? Okay, great. Was the other one going in and out? Yeah. Okay. Sorry about that. So on the other end, you have maybe it's my moving the mic, right? Is that okay? All right, I'll try to hold it super still. Actually, I'm just going to the podium here. Does this work better? Yeah, but I have to lean in. It's weird. Okay, I will try not to oscillate the mic too much. So on the other end, you have people who are, who are still going through their PhD. They may be having, issues and such. And I felt that neither side were able to write as kind of, objectively about their experiences. And also, there's just a format thing, right? There's never a kind of full account of their experience. So I decided that, I wanted to be the one to write about this. So I started accumulating notes about 6 months ago about the 6 years of my PhD and how it progressed, and collecting old emails and notes that I'd taken and old papers and drafts and everything. And after I finished my defense on at the end of April, I sat down for 2 months and I did this writing project. It took about 1 month to write, and then I showed it to some people, got some iteration, got some drafts. It took about another month to revise. And I released it online on my website. I mean, I wasn't intending to make money off this or anything. And it's just a thing I was wanting to do. And I released it on my website, put it all up there. And I just was planning to email some friends and just get people I know to read it and such. But it actually got on, onto certain social media sites and then kind of kept on spreading. And by 2 or 3 weeks time, there had been over 50,000 or so downloads. And I was getting a stream of dozens of emails every day about it, from all sorts of people, from even the most unexpected people. I have some of these sample emails listed. One of my friends who was in grad school, she actually accepted full-time here, but she's not here yet. But she said that, thanks for writing this, because I showed it to my grandma and she loved reading it, because she'd always been bugging me about what is doing a PhD like, and now I don't have to explain it to her because you just did. So I got those emails to other emails from professors, from current students, prospective students, and so on. So I felt like it kind of really struck a nerve with quite a few different types of audiences, and so that's why I'm here today talking to all of you. And I don't think it's a great use of time for me to rehash the contents of my book, because it took me several months to distill down 6 years into, it's only 100 pages. It's very short. For people who've read it, you've probably read it in 3 or 4 hours or something, right? It's actually quite short. But I don't think it's very useful to try to distill that down to 20 or 30 minutes. So I'll just be thrilled to, if there's questions or there's just things we can just launch off talking about. That'd be great. So otherwise, I'm just going to go down the list. Yes, in the front. It's a good question. Yes, definitely. Yeah, definitely. That was fine. So the question was, did I take on any undergraduate minions while I was doing my PhD? Is that the question? So early on in my PhD, I was on this big group project that people who have read about, and there was one or two undergraduates who were working with us also, but the project was so disorganized that like it was like the blind leading the blind. Like I was a first year student, and then my advisor wanted me to like lead some undergraduates to do stuff, and it was not a great experience for either party. And later on in my PhD, I kind of I managed to pick projects that were very self-contained, so I did everything myself. So I don't actually have experience working with undergraduates personally. Sure.
I know you mentioned your, but how but
Good. Okay, that's a good question. So the question is about the role of teaching, because the book was all about research. So I purposely made it very focused on, because like you can talk about all sorts of different things. You can talk about like what I do in terms of teaching or extracurriculars or other stuff. But I doubt that anybody cares about my personal life, right? People care about the process of doing the PhD and getting research out. So the question of teaching. So in our department we had two classes that you had to TA two classes minimal. Because I was on fellowship, I couldn't do what it was called full TA-ship, so I can only do a half TA-ship, which means they pay you half, but you actually do like all the work. So it's actually the worst deal ever. But so I ended up TAing three classes, and for me, teaching was not a huge. The primary teaching for classes was not a huge part of my experience. It didn't take up a ton of time, and it wasn't a huge burden or a huge bonus. Because I mean, this varies by department, but in our department at least, the teaching assistants, we didn't really teach. Like we just kind of maintained the course and held office hours and graded work and stuff. So there wasn't really a big teaching component. There are some people who actually, if they actually like teaching more, they would try to teach a summer course. In that case, they would actually get credit for teaching two courses, and they would actually lead the course and be the lecturer. So for people who like teaching, that was a probably better way to go. That said, though, the teaching experience that I had throughout grad school, which were more gratifying, were just the things I did on my own. So I had two experiences on that. One is I went to, I did some Python tutoring at a local startup that they contacted me because of, I kind of been writing about Python on my blog a few years ago, and then they contacted me and they said that some of their scientists and non-technical people wanted to learn some basic Python just so they could just get a feel for what programming is. So I went there for about 10 weeks, once a week, and I would just write on the whiteboard and do introductory Python stuff. And the other thing, which is even more cool, is that just last year, this guy contacted me. He was a local entrepreneur here, and he contacted me and he said that he was looking for someone to teach him programming because he wanted to learn programming. And he's been this business person for decades. He's a very successful business person, but since he's in the tech world, he wanted to like actually learn to code. So I thought that was really admirable and really cool. So I actually ended up spending about 6 to 9 months with him. We did Skype, mostly just screen share on Skype, pair programming, for about 6. I have an article on my website about this experience. It was an awesome experience, and he basically went from not knowing anything to being able to build a non-trivial kind of Facebook social type of application. It was really cool seeing him build everything, and my role was basically as a tutor. So he would just do everything. I would just send him documentation of like, oh, look into this library, and then he would struggle with it, and then we would debug together and get him over a hump. So that one-on-one was really, really spectacular. But in terms of institutional teaching, that wasn't a big part of my experience. That was a super long answer. Bianca can just field the questions. Yeah, you can. Microphones. So there seems to be what time? Uh-huh. Good. Oh, yes. Yes. Where's this one? Yes. Perfect. Thank you. Bringing the first point. Yes, knowing when to quit. By this, not just meaning quitting the PhD program, but quitting individual projects. Quitting the PhD program is also valid. Yeah. So my first undergrad research supervisor when I was an undergrad, when I visited MIT later on in grad school looking for advice, one of the things he told me was that knowing when to quit is one of the most important things he learned in grad school, because he also had a very similar experience as I did, that he spent his first 3 years working on stuff that like totally didn't work out, and he just made a switch around in the middle and then switch and in his last 3 years he did something else that was way more promising, and now he's a full professor at MIT. And somebody else, the other people have this story too. So I don't know when there's like a great answer to that. I think one of the things, you can't quit too early, right? Because for two reasons. One is that you kind of, it's kind of like there's a losing face type thing that, especially if you're a junior student, you try something for a few months, you're like, oh, I'm just going to quit. Then it doesn't look very good to, your senior colleagues. And also quitting too early may be bad because you just might not have accumulated the skills to get over that hump. That's a very hard question. I think maybe part of it is just if you can find something else that's better, I guess. But that's also very precarious, because I basically quit stuff without having the next thing that I wanted to do. But I just got very lucky with that. So yeah, sorry, I don't have a really. Does anyone else have a better answer? Actually, this is just outsources. Better answer for knowing when to quit. I mean, I know it's very important, but I just have no idea. Let me think. So I think that like midway is a good point. So sorry, maybe this is a somewhat good answer. Is that it's like, when do you know when the middle is when you're streaming through, right? So I think if you're averaging, in the U.S., if you're averaging a 6-year program, then by your third year, so switching advisors, switching groups, I think that usually by your third year you should really figure out whether you want to stay with your defaults, your like that, right? Stay with your defaults, or if the defaults are bad, that you want to switch. But it's very hard to switch later on, I would say. So what year are you right now? Okay, good. So this is exactly the time. Yeah, exactly the time you should be starting thinking about that. Yeah, and yeah. So I think that you can't be quitting too late or too early. Other questions, thoughts? Well, let's go here. Yeah.
So as an undergrad, facing the
Yep. Great. Good. So to repeat the question, so there's this thing called like the Ph.D. glut, which is that the very simple fact that there are way too many more PhDs being produced than academic positions, than positions as professors. So like we were talking about offline, for every professor is training way more students than they can be employed as professors, right? It's one cynical way to look at this is it's as a pyramid scheme, right? A less cynical way to look at it, and especially we're very lucky to be in more applied fields, is that there are great industry options such as here and other places. And I think we had another question offline about intentions of doing a PhD, right? Of why I got into it. So I'll just tell my own story, which is basically the prologue of my book, which is this thing right here. So I decided to start doing my PhD because I did 3 internships during my undergrad at not very good companies, and it was just a terrible experience. I just happened that the places I worked at were your very Dilbert-like cubicle farms, and I could see that. So on one hand, I was the only intern at these places, so I was being treated basically as a junior full-time employee, which is cool because it wasn't, this is a very different internship experience. You guys are very, there's a very great intern program, and there's, people really take care to, feed and clothe the interns. Everyone's wearing Google shirts. Yeah, people take good care to feed and clothe interns, and they take really good care of you here. But when I interned back as an undergrad, I just went to places that were not Google or those sorts of top places, and on one hand, I got to learn a lot about what the quote-unquote real world is like. I was basically doing all the stuff that everyone else is doing. On the other hand, I could see that people who were right out of college working there, people who were 5 years out, people who were 10 years out, 15 years out, 20 years out, I did not really see myself in that kind of life, and they didn't seem super happy with their lives. They didn't seem super happy with their jobs, and it was just not a very great work environment. And one of my one of my dad's friends worked at one of these same companies. He was in another department, and then he would come over to my cubicle sometimes and offer, these stately unsolicited advice. I mean, everything I say is on my website, so this is all public. And he would just be like, you should learn to cover up your monitor. Back when we had these giant CRT monitors, so he said you should learn to get these manila folders like he did and just cover up the sides of the monitor so that he could say that he was blocking out glare, but that's so you can surf the web so that other people walking by can't see what you're doing. And his whole thing was just laying low and just making sure not to cause a ruckus and such. So I thought that if that was the future of my career, then that was probably not great. So there was a big negative motivation because that if I was graduating, with a computer science or engineering degree, and those would be the places that I got exposed to that I was working at, I didn't really want that. And at the same time, like, the positive experiences in school, I kind of liked the idea of doing research, even though I didn't really know what it really meant as an undergrad. And I felt that, I kind of liked the idea of doing research and those kinds of things. So I went into the PhD with that mindset. So it's probably not the most noble intention for doing a PhD. So that's what my top thing was. But I think I'm very glad that I did it. And over the past 6 years, I've learned a ton from my experiences. So it's probably not a really typical story of why I decided to go to PhD, but that's just my own story. And I guess there's a PhD-led issue too, but I'll address that later. There's one in the back. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I've heard great things about the APM program. I don't know about it personally. This actually means a lot to me because what I mean by this is that I guess with the exception of the the full-time people who've been here for a while and they're more veterans, like we are all here, we're all below the bottom of the ladder, right? We're beneath the bottom, right? Like grad students and people who are just recently graduate, we're at the bottom of the bottom. But the thing is that you guys are all in your PhD or you're all motivated to be here because you have a lot of creative energy and great ideas and you want to be pursuing what you love to do. But there's this huge disconnect between as young people, as ourselves, as young people, really wanting to do something creative and make a contribution, and the fact that, we are at the bottom of any hierarchy you are, either in academia or in industry or in anything, we are always at the bottom. So how do you figure out how to push forward your own agendas and what you want to do when you're at the very bottom? And I think this is I could speak the whole hour about this. I'll summarize. Basically, I guess this leading doesn't really necessarily mean leadership of projects or people and such. It really means leading your own agenda. And I think the high level bit here is that you need to get someone who is powerful and influential, interested enough in your work. Have you all seen the movie Inception? It's my favorite movie of all time, right? So basically, you need to get them to think that it's their great ideas and that you are doing it for them. That's one kind of way to put it, that if you can get, and this also goes with the selling thing, that one of the most successful things that I was able to do in my PhD is to get certain people who are fairly influential to be excited about what I wanted to work on because they wanted to work on it as well, and then they were able to publicize it for me and give me great feedback and everything. And so I think that the leading from below, a big part of it is finding people who are more influential and more senior and figuring out how you can be useful to them while still pushing forward sort of what you want. And it's obviously not perfect, right? I mean, we're very few of us are going to be able to say, this is what I want to do and I want to do it. Mike, is that? Okay. We'll get one from the corner.
Well, have you ever learned about more libraries? Too many to it.
Okay, that's a good question. So the question is about advisors being overbooked with too many students. I kind of punted on that route because I actually just went off and did my own thing, which is good and bad. So I was able to be a bit more independent because I was self-funded by fellowships. And also, even in the first 3 years when I was working on my advisor's projects with other students, I wasn't getting a ton of personal attention either. So I think it really depends. Like some students thrive very well when you have good advising, and some students are better off when they're left alone and such. So, but I mean, if that's a concern to you, then maybe one thing is to be proactive about seeking your advisor's time and setting up regular meetings and stuff. So that's the easiest thing to do, I think. Thanks. Yeah, sure, definitely. I'll try to repeat all the questions. So the question is, how do I feel about doing my PhD in Stanford in particular versus other universities? I was pretty agnostic to the actual department and such. I really like. I mean, I ended up. I came here because it was a great school and it was a great program and everything. And I didn't really overplan things. But one of the side effects of me being here for the past 6 years is that I've learned so much about what's going on in industry and startups and just the Silicon Valley entrepreneurial culture. And even though I'm not interested in being an entrepreneur or such, I have friends who are and such, and I really like that Silicon Valley environment. So I think one of the advantages of being at a school like Stanford or Berkeley in the Bay Area is the kind of, you get this closer connection with industry. So I think that was a big advantage. Let's do there. Right. So the question is, in theory versus systems. So, I spent most of my 10,000 hours in grad school programming like hunched over, right? And if my friends in theory spend a lot of hours, scratching their heads, thinking about problems, writing on the whiteboard, getting very frustrated about things. So it's a different type of grind. I think, I don't know how my experiences would have been in theory because I haven't really done that. Did you have any ideas about what kind of things might be different? Okay. I think, yeah. So I mean, this is my own like unfounded opinions, but I think I have a feeling that in theory there is more of a variance in so I think it's not as linear in the sense of somebody can make a really brilliant contribution their first year of grad school because they've been doing theoretical math for many years and they come in and they can publish one great paper right in the beginning because there's a great insight. Of course, you have to work a lot at it too. I mean, it's not like it comes instantly. But I think in a systems-oriented field, I think it's practically impossible for a first-year student to be like, I built this thing and I evaluated it and I got it published at a top conference all within 1 year, my first year. So I think the non-linearity may be a lot bigger in theory than in systems that if you're actually having to hack on stuff for your PhD, it's just much harder to get stuff out there for early. But I don't know otherwise though. Still on this corner.
Have you ever had a piece that what was very application? How to figure it out? How the advisor helps yourself?
Okay, so the question is about like work being more applied and more industry relevant rather than being more academic and such. Like were you thinking about like commercializing stuff, like building a company out of things, or?
No, I'm a fourth year student. What I'm doing is very application and very difficult to focus on.
That's right.
So I'm sort of in the desperate state where I'm trying to focus on research.
Yep.
However, my data and my project come out.
There's no proprietary issues. It's just that like this is just not what's valid. So I mean, there's always like lower tier things you could be publishing at. That's what I end up doing. But still, there's issues. I mean, just conferences and journals that are easier to get in than the top things. All right. I mean, that's one compromise you can make is submitting to less competitive than. But it's ultimately up to your advisor. I mean, if your advisor is like, you must publish a paper at the top conference or I'll not let you graduate, then there's no choice. But I think compromises have to be met somehow. Let's do one in the back, the green. Yeah. Okay, that's a really good question. So it's now that I have my PhD, how am I planning to leverage, I guess, what I learned in my PhD? Without getting too much in the specifics of what I'm doing here, because I want this talk to be public, we can talk afterwards about Google internal stuff. But basically, as a high-level summary, I think I got very lucky that I'm here doing a certain type of work that I really want to be doing, and it would have been very hard for me to be doing this without having gotten my PhD. Not because I'm using my PhD thesis in my work. That's like not the case at all. It's just because I actually just a lot of these lessons I learned about basically trying to get myself in a position to do the work I like and to be leading from below, to be getting influential people interested in my projects, to be making pitches to people, like all this very entrepreneurial stuff I learned that I think it would be very useful in industry and other things. But I'd be happy to talk offline about specifics. Well, right next to him. Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's a great question. So the question is about reforming the PhD process. I guess is there a need to reform how PhD programs work? And I think people have looked into this in the UK, for example, right? That in Europe, there's proposals for more streamlined PhD programs. There's proposals for different types of funding models and things. I haven't really thought about those issues myself. For one of the main reasons is practical, is that I'm not in a position to do this sort of stuff, right? I'm not, a leader in research who goes to summits to debate with university presidents and talk to the NSF leaders and such. So I haven't given these things thoughts myself. Good segue here. My whole thing throughout my PhD was that there is a game there that we have to all play, and we cannot change the game because we're, again, at the bottom of the rungs of the ladder. So the only way is you either quit the game and you don't play that altogether. That's good because no one's forcing you to. Or if you want to get a PhD and to start a career doing something related to that, you need to be playing the game. And this is not just for people in PhDs. Like people who are assistant professors have to play the game to get tenure as well. And the hope is once you get tenure, if you're well connected enough, you can, when you're in your 40s and stuff, you can hope to try to change the game with reforms and stuff. But that's totally outside my scope. Good question though. Oh, sir, we have. Oh, this corner. Okay, sorry about that.
So at the beginning of your
Right. Yep.
So would you advise either
Yeah. You can read this offline also. Yeah, I'll repeat the question. Can you hear the mic or is something's out? These mics. Weird. Yeah, my mic. Okay, I guess I'll just stand up here. Sorry about that. Let's just be like awkward up here. Yeah, that's a hard question of I do this, right? The paying the dues thing, right? So I wrote here, not pay your dues, but pay some dues. And I think that I paid my dues for a bit too long. I think that there is an optimal point that it's very hard, especially in a very applied systems-oriented field, that I've seen very rarely have I seen first-year students say, I have a great project idea, I mean, a lot of people going to PhD think this, including myself. It's like, I have this great idea for a project, and it's so cool and so innovative, I'm just going to do it. And I don't care what anybody thinks, I'm just going to do it. And the thing you find out really fast is that there is often a large disconnect between what you find is interesting and innovative. So academic research is a small subset of what is interesting and cool and innovative, right? So there's this large set of stuff that's cool and innovative, and there's a smaller set that's some kind of research thing, right? So Google does a lot of research that's non-academic, right? So there's a smaller set that's some kind of researchy, cutting-edge stuff. There's a smaller set that is considered quasi-academic research, so like some people may be publishing off it. There's a small set of that's considered respectable academic research that is being published at top venues. The people who determine that are the people who are senior in the field right now. And then of that, there's an even smaller set that you are capable of doing due to your resources, right? Due to your lab, due to your advisor, due to your own skills. So I think it's very hard for someone coming in to think that they are actually in that subset. And it's great to try to do that yourself. So I actually, in my first year, I tried to do some of that stuff myself, but I quickly found out that was probably a worse experience than having to just be on a grindy project that didn't go anywhere. I mean, the good thing about being on basically everybody who I've talked to who's gotten through their PhD successfully, everybody has burned that first 2 years. Like if you're doing a 6-year program, your first 2 years will be probably pretty useless. Do people sort of agree with that, or people are vehemently against? Katrina says yes. Yeah, like people who are very successful in their PhDs, the first 2 years, everybody's just like, things just didn't work. And a lot of that is the learning through doing thing too, right? That it's the most optimistic view is that you can't really get good unless you struggle at things. And in my first 2 years, even though the projects didn't end up contributing to dissertation, I guess the sort of immediate benefit was that I was basically hacking a lot of low-level C code, right? So I was doing a lot of low-level C programming, and it was really gross, hard to debug and stuff. But because I had those thousands of hours of practice doing that, later on in my PhD, I was able to approach projects that other people were not even thinking about doing because they didn't have these sorts of skills. So you can view it as skills building. But in general, it's a very hard question. I think that you should definitely not do this for like 4 or 5 years and hope that 1 year you're going to finish something. So maybe I think 2 years is fine. Because if you don't burn on that, you're going to burn on something else. So I think we had one in that corner. Yeah, back there. Hmm? Good. It's a good question. So the question is, if I could go back in time 5 years, would I have just gone in industry right away rather than doing PhD? And I personally would not have, because I wouldn't have gotten this book out of it. Like, I personally would not have, and also would not have gotten my current position out of it. So, without going into details, basically, I got my current job for a particular job role because of a side project I did during my PhD. So the side project thing is another thing that's not on here. I didn't talk about this in my book because it's not germane to the PhD experience, but the PhD is a great time for, I'm just going off on a rant here. The PhD is a great time for, this kind of goes to your question of, what's the purpose of doing a PhD, especially in a very applied field. I was getting reader responses from friends who, from some friends who were interested in doing a PhD, and he was saying how now that he's been in industry for many years, for 5 or 6 years, and he said that he subletted an apartment from a friend in Boston who was a PhD student, and those few months that they were subletting, he just had a ton of fun just being able to talk to people who were very intellectually curious and smart and motivated. And and he said that in industry, a lot of times, everyone has a lot of stuff to do and they have priorities and such, and it's just very hard to get smart, motivated people together with some free time and lack of responsibility to do cool stuff. So the great thing about PhD is that they're paying you like almost nothing. So you just don't feel bad about taking 2 weeks off to hack on something or taking, right? It's like, because things, there are deadlines, right? You have to submit papers, you have to do stuff, but, there are cycles, right? Sometimes you're just not feeling it for a few weeks. So, you're not feeling for a few weeks and you just don't do anything. Or you just team up with your buddies and you can hack on some interest. So like around 2007, for example, this is when Facebook apps really started to come about. And quite a few, masters and PhD students at Stanford, like they were doing their classes, doing the research, and they just spent their time at night just hacking in the building. And some of these people, ended up making some money off of their Facebook apps or their iPhone apps. And most side projects you do probably won't turn anything commercially viable, but it's just a cool time for serendipity to occur. So that's one of the reasons why I really enjoyed it. And I think basically, the calculation everyone has to make, or the rationalization afterwards, is like, did you gain more than you lost? Right? So there are certain things you gain and there are certain things you lost, and if you felt you gained more than you lost, then it's a good call. But it's personal to everybody, right? It's really hard to make a generalization. Very back. That was a really easy choice because I couldn't get any. I basically last summer, so around this time I was here. Around the time I was interning here, I went to some conferences to give talks and stuff, and that was when the switch finally flipped. Like, I was veering away from academia for a few years, and it's mostly because of my publication record. Like, I just wasn't publishing in top tier places. I knew how competitive the job market was, and I wasn't willing to try to work on a postdoc for a few years and really go with that. But last summer, I decided that the switch just totally flipped, and I decided I'm just not going to apply for academic jobs. And that was such a big sense of relief. And also it was such a big boost to my own creativity in the sense of one of the advantages of academia that people tout is that it's a place, the closest place you can approximate having creative freedom and whatever. But for me, the decision to quit academia last year actually opened up way more creative endeavors for myself in 2 ways. One is that I was able to look for jobs and another non-traditional roles. And the other way is that it actually got me to do my final project, which I actually visited Harvard to do, actually opened up opportunity for me to do a really cool project because I didn't have to worry about, I need to publish in top conferences or whatever. I actually just met a professor at a conference last summer, and we just started chatting about research. And I was just not afraid at all because, before, if I was like, I'm going to apply for an academic job, I need to kiss up to professors and what did I say, and I get really nervous and everything. But I was pretty much the only person at the conference who was just like, I'll just say whatever and do whatever, because everybody else, especially senior grad students, postdocs, everyone was on their top game, right? Shaking hands, pitching their research, talking about let's get a grant together and stuff. And I was just going around just doing whatever, and that just worked out really well for me. So I actually did not do an academic job hunt at all. So here. That's right. Right. Yeah, that's a really good question. So the question was that I was on fellowship for 5 of the 6 years of my PhD, and most people in our department were funded by their advisor's grants as an RA, and they taught sometimes as a combination. That was I thought about that a lot, and even though I was funded on fellowship, if you read in my memoir, the first 3 years I acted as if I wasn't funded on fellowship. I basically, it wasn't like I come out on fellowship and I can do whatever the hell I want, because in the end you still need 3 professors to sign off and let you graduate. So you still need to be in good favor of professors and do sort of stuff they're interested in. So my first 3 years I acted as though I wasn't on my own funding, but the last 2 or 3 years I had my own funding. I think it did make a big difference, obviously, in my own experience, that I was able to have more freedom to diverge and do my own thing. It's also a curse as well, because if you're doing your own thing, you don't have institutional support. So I had to make a lot more proactive efforts to get my work published. I had to face a lot more rejections. I had to just basically end-to-end do a lot of my own stuff. I had to do my own project definition, I had to write all my own papers, deal with all the rejection notices, everything myself. There was no team and people to do that. So I think that again, it's hard to generalize, but the students, if you're optimizing for publishing top-rate papers and getting out with a good CV, the students I've seen that do the best are the ones who partner with really good assistant professors with grant funding. They can be on fellowship also, but basically if you partner with someone, this is sort of this, but if you partner with someone who is like dead set on publishing, because they need to publish for their lives, right? Because they're an assistant professor and they need to be publishing top-notch papers. If you partner with them and you get along well with them, then there's this great synergy that happens, and students I've seen do very well in that. That is if you want to optimize for publishing papers and graduating with a good CV. And I did not really have that myself. So that's a big part of the reason why I didn't go for an academic job, because I didn't have the kind of CV that looked good for academia. I think we have a bunch of questions back there. It's a good question. So did I ever think about quitting? So I never thought seriously about quitting. There was this is one down here somewhere. I never thought seriously about quitting, but I think a part of it was because I had funding. So I'm like, I have this 5 years of money, then might as well use it and just might as well use it. And there wasn't, because I was my perception of jobs in industry was not a great perception, because I didn't intern at great places. So I'm like, if I quit and I just go get a job in industry, I was tainted by that bad perception I had in the beginning. So I'm like, I don't look any different on paper now, so I don't really see. But the thing is, being in Silicon Valley, I think you could get very good jobs. I had friends who definitely left early and they were able to get very good jobs. So it really depends on everybody. But I personally didn't. Have another back there. Sure. Good. So it's a question about the actual book writing process. So I basically decided about 6 months ago to do this, and I just started collecting notes together from old emails, and just like my research notebook, right? There's just like text files and notes that I kept, and various paper rejection notices that I could quote from. So basically, I just started compiling stuff together, and I did this on the back burner, right? So as I was writing my dissertation, in my spare time, I would start refining my notes. So this is the way I often work. I can only do one thing at once, but I have one background thread that I can do something else. So while I'm doing my dissertation writing for 3 months, in the back I was molding this outline. And then once my defense was done and I passed, then I could free up my time to doing this writing full time. So it only took a few months, but and the content is actually not any. This book was all original content. It wasn't taken from other writings I had, which because I didn't want to be redundant with other stuff. Here. I'll take yours offline. Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's right.
How do you figure out what to do? That's like
Mm-hmm. Right. I think it's hard to know to know what the game is in your department. I think just talking to senior students is the best way, right? They're just talking to senior students in your group and other groups and stuff. There's usually some, department, nothing is explicit, right? There's not like, I don't think anyone's advisor is like, you must publish these 2 papers at this conference and they'll let you graduate. It's all kind of fuzzy. And I think that from professor's perspective, they don't really like to talk about it because they don't want to make the PhD out to be some, checkbox thing where I check one paper off and check another paper off. Everybody has their own, there are professors who don't want their student to publish at all because they just want them to write one long 200-page thing that's amazing and detailed and don't need to worry about publishing. So I think you just have to figure out the best thing is if you can talk to your advisor about it. That's the best, obviously, but that's maybe hard to do. But I think it's just talking to people around you. Okay, great, thank you. Here. Mm-hmm. It's a great question. So the question's about, how do you balance helping other people versus this one, right? How do you balance helping other people's projects versus your own? I think one very rough rule of thumb is that if you're in, let's assuming you're doing a 6-year US program, just assuming 6 years. If you're in your first 3 years, I think taking every opportunity you can to help other people is probably the best because that's helping senior students and postdocs, whoever, that's where you're going to learn a lot from. And that's your most likely chance of getting a paper published. And even if that paper isn't, those papers don't go towards your thesis, it's just the idea of being able to practice end to end of hacking on systems, writing papers, dealing with rejections, submitting papers, because there's just a whole art about it. And if you can partner with someone by helping them, then they're obviously very motivated because it's their project. And as you tagging along, you can get some credit and you can learn a lot. I would say that in your last few years, that you should be a lot more hesitant on because you want to really get your foot out the door. And I think it's more justified for you to be more selfish later on too, because you need to graduate yourself. Right. Sure. Right. So the question is about the paper writing process. So this, again, varies a lot by field. So in computer science and typical computer science systems fields, you're trying to be publishing in these kind of top tier conferences. And basically that involves writing a pretty dense 10-page or so paper. And you submit it. There's a deadline for every conference. You submit it, and then you get feedback within about 3 months or so. But the feedback is really, you don't get to revise it oftentimes. It's you get it and it's either a yes or no. And if it's a no, there's another conference coming up that you can resubmit to. So usually for one paper, you can probably submit it about 3 times a year, 2 to 3 times a year. And the trick with that is you really have to balance out. Once you submit one paper, you have to be either working on another project or some extension of the paper. You really have to time it. So you can't just single task and say, I want to get this paper in no matter what and not do anything else. You can if your advisor's like, you will get this paper in and somewhere and you'll graduate, and you just focus on one thing. But there's definitely a strategy involved in, in getting feedback and such. Let's do one all the way in the back. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. How do I think advisors react if you just came in just wanting to do cool stuff? I think if you're self-funded, then they may be okay with it because they're not paying for you. So if you're self-funded, you could do that. I wanted to sort of do that my first few years, but I kind of had an eye not really on going to academia as much, but as on I need to play the game to graduate. So I think that if you have your own money, it's good. If you don't, then it may be harder to convince them. It just depends on the person. Right? If you're very, charismatic and very good at convincing people, then that's great. The longer term thing you want to think about is how you're going to get a PhD out of it, or if you want to. If you don't want to, if you just want to hack on cool stuff for 2 or 3 years, get funded, and then drop out, that's legit as well. So it just depends. I think doing cool stuff, especially when you come in the beginning, that doesn't have a very high probability of getting you published and getting a PhD. But if your goal is to just do cool stuff, not necessarily get a degree, and just be funded for a few years doing cool stuff, that's a good route to go. Let's do that. Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. Right. Right. Um, yeah, so one of the yeah, so I never had that problem because I didn't have that many choices. But if you have a lot of ideas that you could be working on, maybe one way to optimize is, what's the one that is most likely to produce something tangible first, whether it's a publication or it's a, some kind of milestone. And I think this kind of output trumps input thing, this is kind of relevant, is that one cool way of looking at this is that your PhD is all about what you output, right? And output for most things is about papers or your thesis or whatever. And so if you have 5 ideas and one of them is most likely to result in something, then I would maybe go with that one. Because if you get some output, then you can get some feedback and get some, you can have a launching point for something else. Because it's all too easy to just kind of work on some half-baked things that don't pan out. So, okay. Right. Here.
At this point of giving many talks,
yes. Oh, yes. It's very meta, right? Yeah. So I think I gave about 25 or so talks throughout my PhD. So I gave like one talk every few months. And this was one of the pieces of advice that like professors always tell you about, but like no one really gets it when they say it. They're like, oh, you should talk about your work. Giving talks has been one of the most useful things for me at all stages. So if you're just forming a project or starting out, if you can just give a very informal talk to your group mates, like at lab meeting or something within your school of students, they can give you like great early feedback. It's basically just a way of getting early feedback on what makes sense and doesn't make sense from a very superficial level. And as you develop your project and when you're about to submit a paper, like giving a talk right before you submit a paper is really useful because people are going to come up with common criticisms like, oh, why didn't you think of this? Or what do you do about this? And those common criticisms are what you need to address in like the very beginning of your paper, right? Because the talks are really about someone getting a superficial view of your research, and paper reviewers get a very superficial view of your research because they have a stack of 30 papers to review. If they don't like your paper within the first 2 minutes, they're going to dismiss it and find ways to reject it rather than to accept it. So you need to make an amazing first impression, right? You need to make an amazing first impression on the first page, and giving a talk right when you're about to submit a paper is a great way to ferret out those really easy, it's just like usability testing, right? I mean, very simple informal usability testing. You're kind of testing usability of your presentation. And then obviously giving the more, it's funny because giving the more formal conference talks to, quote unquote important people, those are actually much less useful because you're at a conference and everyone's on their laptop and, no one really cares who you are and stuff. And you're just kind of giving it because you have a paper accepting you have to give a talk. So for me, the more informal talks are actually very useful. So I gave a tech talk here last 2 years ago, whatever. And somebody, amazingly, people came to my tech talk who I didn't invite. Like there are actual people who actually were interested that weren't my friends. And there's some guy in the back who was like pestering me with questions. And, I thought he was kind of being annoying, but then he ended up like afterwards, he was like, I'm really interested in this work. Why don't you come intern for me this summer and I'll just let you work on this, your own open source project all summer because I'm just interested in these topics. And I accepted my internship, and that's what I spent last summer doing. I spent all my time working on my open source research project here at Google under his protection because he was just interested in having me around. So that's an unexpected serendipity of giving talks. Another one was that after a talk, because after you give a talk, people have a context between it. So another grad student emailed me saying, oh, did you see this blog post by blah, 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 a related topic? Then I saw the blog post, and then I emailed this guy a few months later. He was at Berkeley. Emailed this guy a few months later saying, oh, I'm doing something related. We chatted, and that was basically the foundation of two of the 5 projects I did for my thesis came out of talking with that guy, which would have never happened if I didn't give another talk and another student hadn't sent me a link to his blog. So weird stuff happens when you give talks. Yes, here.
So I really like how throughout your book, analyze.
Mm-hmm.
But how do you take that from your
That's right. So the question is how easy or hard is it to evaluate people's motivations looking forward? I think that you just get better at it every iteration through. So there's nothing perfect. So while I'm starting my career here, I think that I'm better at evaluating the motivations of my superiors than I was in my first year of grad school. And that's another PhD learning thing. I mean, you can learn this in industry. I mean, you learn this everywhere, right? If you work with enough people, you just get more repetitions and do it. But I don't think there's an easy answer. But obviously, my thing was written in retrospect, so yeah. Okay, let's get one last question. And people can come up to me offline. I mean, I'll be happy to chat here. The red shirt. Right. Yeah, so if I had interned at Google during my undergrad, I would probably be at Google without my PhD. Yeah, if I had back then in those years, Google was obviously, this was around 2003, 2004, 2005. So Google was very up and coming. Microsoft was a big place that, that Microsoft was the Google of internships back then. That was their top internship program. My friends who went to Microsoft or Google back then mostly went full time there. So if I had actually had an amazing intern experience, I probably would not have done my PhD. I would not be giving this talk here. Cool. Well, thanks a lot, and I'll be around afterwards for questions. So, thanks.